Beneath the heavy, scent-drenched rafters of the Artorian Great Hall, the air tasted of copper and stagnant desperation. This was the mating auction, the final stop for the broken, the discarded, and the unwanted. In a world where the pack hierarchy demanded every wolf be tethered to another, those standing on this raised wooden platform were the outliers, the lame livestock of the shifter world. The hall, which usually hosted coronations and grand treaties, felt small tonight, suffocating under the weight of 1,000 judgmental eyes. Among the women arranged in a line stood Kaelen. She was swallowed by a cloak of midnight wool, a garment so heavy it seemed to pull the light from the room. A hood was pulled low, casting a veil of impenetrable shadow over her features. She did not preen like the desperate girl to her left. Woohoo adjusted her bodice for the 10th time. She did not weep like the aging widow to her right, whose tears tracked through a mask of carefully applied powder. Kaelen stood as a ghost, a silhouette of secrets. She didn't want to be seen. In fact, she prayed to every god in the shifter pantheon that she would remain invisible, even here. The crowd's murmurs were a physical weight. What monster hides behind that cloth? Is she scarred, or perhaps simply so hideous that even the desperate wouldn't bid? The whispers rippled through the hall like wind through dead grass. Beneath the fabric, Kaelen's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew the truth. She was a witch, a fire weaver in a kingdom that had outlawed her kind for generations. Worse, she carried the brand of a murderer on her brow, a cross-shaped scar that marked her as the woman who had allegedly burned her own fiancé alive. She could still smell the smoke of that night, still feel the heat of the flames that had taken Eric's life and left her a pariah. "If I am not sold," she whispered to her wolf, who whimpered in the back of her mind, "my father will sell me to the salt mines as a slave." Her father, Lord Alaric, stood at the edge of the dais. He was a man of sharp angles and sharper cruelty. He pretended not to know her, staring at the ceiling with an expression of bored disgust. Beside him was her sister, Seraphina, the perfect daughter, watching Kaelen's humiliation with a sneer of triumph. Seraphina had always been the golden child, the one who didn't accidentally set curtains on fire when she was angry. The auctioneer's voice was a rhythmic drone, us listing the bloodlines of a scarred warrior woman and a pregnant, abandoned Omega. He moved with the enthusiasm of a man selling spoiled grain. He reached the end of the line, his hand hovering near Kaelen's shoulder. And finally, a mystery. Highborn, or so her father claims. Sight unseen, bidding starts at. The massive oak doors of the hall didn't just open. They exploded inward. A wave of alpha dominance rolled through the room, a pressure so immense that the weaker wolves in the audience dropped to their knees. It wasn't just power. It was a primordial, ancient chill. The torches in their brackets flickered and nearly died, the temperature in the room dropping 20 degrees in a heartbeat. The Alpha King, King Silas of Artoria, stepped into the torchlight. He was a creature of winter, pale gold hair that shimmered like frost, and eyes the color of a frozen lake. He was beautiful in the way a glacier is beautiful, magnificent, but capable of crushing anything in its path. Rumors said he was merciless. Rumors said his heart was a block of obsidian. He walked into the hall as if he owned the very air the commoners breathed. Silas didn't look at the noble women in the front rows who fainted or smoothed their hair. He walked straight to the platform, his boots thudding with the finality of a heartbeat. He passed the weeping widow. He ignored the defiant warrior. He stopped directly in front of Kaelen. The silence was absolute. Not a single wolf dared to growl or shift. "I'll take her," Silas said. His voice was a blade through silk, cold, sharp, and final. The hall erupted in a cacophony of shock. "Why her? She hides her face. Your Majesty, you could have any princess in the 5 kingdoms." Silas didn't blink. He reached out, his hand wrapping around Kaelen's gloved wrist. His touch wasn't just cool, it was icy. It sent a jolt of shock through her system that felt like a lightning strike. "Come," he commanded. The carriage ride to the citadel was a blur of gray stone and mounting dread. Kaelen sat across from the king, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Through the small window, she saw the towers of the castle piercing the pale sky. She had expected to be sold to a merchant or a low-ranking pack leader. Instead, she was being whisked away by the most powerful man in the world. When they were finally ushered into the king's private study, the door clicked shut, sealing them in a room that smelled of old parchment and cedar. Silas stood by a window, stood staring out at the jagged peaks of the northern range. "Your Majesty," Kaelen whispered, dropping into a deep curtsy. Her hood slipped forward, concealing her further. Silas turned. Up close, his beauty was terrifying. He looked like he had been carved from a single block of marble. "The wedding will be in 3 days," he said, skipping any pretense of courtly grace. "I have already signed the decrees. My advisors are preparing the announcement." "You haven't even seen me," Kaelen blurted out. The words felt reckless, but she couldn't help it. "My father said, he said I was a stain, a curse. You need to know why I wear the hood. If I show you the truth, you will regret this." "I don't care," Silas interrupted, his voice void of warmth. "I have no interest in your face, Kaelen. In fact, I have a condition of my own." He walked toward her, the temperature in the room dropping with every step. "We will marry. You will be my queen in title. You will have jewels, lands, and the protection of the throne. My guards will ensure no one, not even your father, ever touches you again. You will live in the West Wing. It is private. You will want for nothing." Kaelen felt a flicker of hope, protection, safety, a life where she wouldn't have to look at her father's hateful eyes. "But," Silas continued, his gray eyes locking onto the shadow of her hood, "I will never look beneath that veil. I will never seek your company beyond what is required for the succession. We will not share a bed, save for the necessity of an heir. And most importantly, I will never love you. Do not expect it. Do not hope for it. My heart is not part of this bargain." Kaelen flinched. The words were blunt, but they weren't cruel. They were a contract, a clear set of rules for a woman who had spent her life navigating the shifting sands of her father's moods. "I can live with that," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Indifference is a mercy I haven't known in years. Cold is better than cruelty." Silas nodded once. "Then we have an agreement. Rest tonight. My blind maids will attend to you." The council meeting the following morning was a battlefield. Lord Alaric sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, his face twisted in a mask of feigned concern. He looked like a man who had been cheated out of a profitable sale, which, in a way, he had. "Your Majesty," Alaric began, his voice oily. "As her father, I must warn you, Kaelen is unstable. The reason she hides herself is because she is a monster. If you knew the crimes she committed in my house, the way she destroyed our reputation—" "Lord Alaric," Silas's voice was like cracking ice, "I did not invite you here to speak. I invited you here to witness the signing of the royal contract. Kaelen is no longer your daughter. She is my queen. If you speak another word against her, I will consider it an act of treason against the crown." Silas slid the parchment toward Kaelen. The terms were exactly as they had discussed: a marriage of convenience, a life of luxury and seclusion, and a vow of perpetual distance. Kaelen signed her name with a steady hand. She watched her father's face turn a sickly shade of purple. The man who had spent a decade telling her she was worthless now had to bow to her. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. As she left the chamber, Seraphina caught her in the hallway. Her sister's pale blue gown was exquisite, but her face was ugly with spite. "You think you've won?" she hissed. He's an alpha, Kaelen. He's a predator. Eventually, he'll get bored of the mystery. He'll rip that hood off, and when he sees the brand on your head, when he realizes he married the girl who burned her own mate, he'll execute you himself. Then I'll enjoy the 3 days of peace I have left, Kaelen replied, walking past her without looking back. The wedding at the Artorian Cathedral was a spectacle of cold grandeur. Kaelen walked down the aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, and she preferred it that way. Her heavy white veil was layered over her hood, making her look like a towering pillar of snow. The nobility whispered behind their lace fans, their eyes searching for a glimpse of skin that wasn't there. Silas stood at the altar in charcoal velvet. He looked like a statue brought to life. When the priest asked for the vows, Silas didn't speak of devotion or passion. He spoke of duty. "I claim you," he said, his voice echoing in the rafters. "My wife, my queen, my mate." Kaelen felt her wolf stir. There was no mate bond snap, no golden thread of fate that the stories promised. Just the cold reality of the rings being exchanged. When Silas took her hand to slide the band onto her finger, she almost gasped. He was freezing, genuinely, unnaturally cold. It felt like holding a piece of dry ice. "You may kiss the bride," the priest announced, his voice trembling. The crowd leaned in. The atmosphere was electric with curiosity. But would he lift it? Would the mystery be solved? Silas simply took her gloved hand and raised it to his lips. A formal, distant kiss. "Thank you," he murmured against her knuckles. Outside, the commoners cheered, but the air was thick with confusion. They had a queen who was a ghost, and a king who was a glacier. The wedding night arrived with the scent of rosewater and the crackle of a dying fire. Kaelen sat on the edge of the massive canopied bed, her heart hammering. The room was beautiful, filled with silks and fine wood, but it felt like a cage. Silas entered, dressed only in a white tunic, unlaced at the throat. He looked more human in the dim light, less like a king and more like a man. He pulled a strip of black silk from his pocket. "A blindfold," he said softly. "So you can be certain I will not see you, even accidentally." He turned his back, allowing her to tie the silk over his eyes. When she stepped close, Kaelen realized he was trembling slightly. It was a minute movement, but she felt it. "I can smell your fear," he whispered. "It's not fear," she lied. "It's anticipation." He reached out, his hands finding her shoulders. His palms were large and cool, tracing the line of her collarbone with a gentleness that didn't match his reputation. When he slid the straps of her nightgown down, his touch was hesitant, as if he were afraid of breaking her. They came together in the dark, a dance of shadows and skin. Kaelen found herself mapping the hard planes of his chest, the scars on his shoulders, the frantic beat of his heart. He was so cold, yet the friction of their bodies created a heat that felt like a localized sun. Now she found herself craving his touch, her body responding to him in ways she didn't understand. For the first time, Kaelen felt her magic stir, not with the violent, destructive rage of the fire that had killed Eric, but with a low, humming warmth. It flowed through her veins, meeting his cold skin and creating sparks of pleasure that made her gasp. Afterward, Silas didn't leave immediately. He stayed, his arm draped over her waist, his breathing evening out. "Why?" she whispered into the dark, her voice barely a breath. "Why the blindfold? Why the distance?" "Because," Silas murmured, his voice thick with sleep, "some things are too dangerous to look at directly. And I have spent my life looking at the sun." The weeks that followed were a strange domestic rhythm. Silas visited her every night. At first it was for the heir, a duty to be performed. But soon the conversations lasted longer than the lovemaking. They talked about the kingdom, about the trade embargoes, about the ancient laws that governed their kind. Kaelen realized Silas was brilliant, but lonely. He was surrounded by vipers, and she was the only one who wanted nothing from him but safety. She became his sounding board, his secret advisor. "The trade with the Southern Isles is failing because we have no potions," Silas lamented one night, his head resting in her lap as she stroked his golden hair. "The ban on magic has left us vulnerable. Our soldiers die of infections that a simple healing charm could fix." "Then lift the ban," Kaelen said, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Silas tensed. "My father was killed by a witch, a fire user who went mad. Well, he made me swear to keep the kingdom pure. He said magic is a rot that eats at the heart of the pack." "Was he killed by a witch? Or by his own fear?" Kaelen challenged. "Fire isn't evil, Silas. It's just energy. It can cook a meal or burn a house down. It depends on the hand that holds it." Silas didn't answer, but the next day he asked her to review the legalities of the magical restrictions. He brought her books, ancient scrolls that hadn't been touched in decades. Kaelen devoured them, her mind working through the complexities of Artorian law. Kaelen knew she was playing a dangerous game. She sought advice from Lady Regina, a sophisticated noblewoman who had survived 3 husbands and knew every secret in the court. "How do I keep him?" Kaelen asked Regina over tea in a secluded garden. "He said he would never love me. He said he would stop coming once I was pregnant." Regina smiled, her eyes sharp. "Men like Silas don't know what they want until they can't live without it. Don't be a duty, Kaelen. Be a necessity. Exhaust him. Make him feel things he has spent his life suppressing. And for the love of the moon, don't let him stay cold." So Kaelen became bolder. She used the techniques Regina suggested, touching him in ways that made him groan, whispering things that made his heart race. She built the fire in the hearth higher every night, fighting back the chill that seemed to emanate from his very bones. She found herself falling for him. Not just the king, but the man who liked his tea with too much honey, and who worried about the orphans in the lower city. She loved the way his voice softened when he spoke to her in the dark. The turning point came when Kaelen realized she was pregnant. The news should have been a relief. The contract was fulfilled. She had done her job. But as she watched Silas hold a small wooden toy he had carved for the nursery, her heart ached. She was in love with a man who refused to look at her. "I'm with child," she told him one evening as the sun set behind the mountains. Silas went still. He dropped the carving. "An heir," he whispered. "Yes, you have what you wanted. You don't have to come here anymore. You can go back to your cold tower and your cold laws." Silas turned toward her, even though he was blindfolded. "Is that what you want? For me to stop coming?" "No," Kaelen whispered, her voice breaking. "I want you to stay. I want you to love me." He moved toward her, pulling her into his arms with a desperation that shocked her. "I can't stay, Kaelen. If I stay, if I let myself feel—" He suddenly gasped, clutching his chest. He collapsed to the floor, his skin turning a terrifying translucent shade of blue. Frost began to spiderweb across the stone floor, radiating from his body. "Silas!" Kaelen ripped the blindfold from his eyes. She didn't care about her secret anymore. She didn't care about the brand. "The curse!" Silas wheezed, his eyes unfocused. "My line, we cannot love. An ancestor cursed the kings of Artoria because he was betrayed by a witch. If a king of Artoria falls in love, his heart freezes. We die. That's why I stayed away. That's why I kept the world cold." Kaelen screamed for help, but she knew the healers wouldn't understand. This was magic. Ancient, cruel, generational magic. I chose you because I thought I couldn't love a shadow." Silas laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I thought a woman without a face would be safe. I was wrong. I love you, Kaelen. I love your mind. I love the way you challenge me. I love the way you smell of wood smoke and honey." "No, don't love me," Kaelen sobbed. She grabbed his hands, trying to warm them with her own, but the ice was winning. It was moving up his arms, turning his veins to crystal. "Hate me, Silas, look at me and hate me! She threw back her hood, exposing her face to the light for the first time. Silas blinked, his gray eyes struggling to focus through the pain. He saw her pale skin, her dark hair, and then his eyes landed on her forehead. The brand. The mark of the fire witch. I am a witch, Silas. I am the thing that killed your peace. I am a murderer. My father framed me, but I have the power. Look at me, and let your love die so you can live. Silas reached up, his fingers trembling as he touched the scar. You're beautiful, he whispered. The brand, it doesn't matter. I know your soul, Kaelen. You didn't kill anyone. You're the most compassionate person I've ever known. I did. The fire... No, Silas gasped, his breath a puff of frost. Your father. Lord Alaric. He told me. He bragged about it once when he was drunk at a hunt. How he framed the cursed daughter to save the perfect one's reputation. I didn't believe him then. I didn't want to believe. But I see it now. You are my fire. He was slipping away. The ice was closing over his heart, a literal block of frost forming in his chest. Kaelen didn't think. She reached deep into her soul, past the fear, past the years of being bound by her father's dampening spells. She felt the seal Alaric had placed on her mind, a jagged, ugly thing that had suppressed her true nature for a decade. With a scream of pure, unadulterated will, she shattered it. Fire exploded from her fingertips. Not the destructive, chaotic orange of a forest fire, but a pure, white heat that glowed like a star. She pressed her hands to Silas's chest, right over his failing heart. Live! She commanded. I am the fire, and you are the ice. I am your mate, and I will not let you go. The room filled with steam. The frost on the walls melted into rivers. Silas's heart, frozen solid by a century of generational trauma and magical spite, began to thaw. The white fire flowed into him, not burning, but warming him from the inside out. He let out a long, ragged breath. The blue tint left his lips. His eyes cleared, focusing on Kaelen's tear-streaked face. You're here, he whispered. I can see you. You're so beautiful. I'm here, she sobbed, collapsing onto his chest. And I'm never hiding again. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. Kaelen summoned the council and demanded they bring a powerful witch to the castle. When they hesitated, she showed them a flicker of her white flame, and they moved with newfound speed. The witch, an old woman named Alara, confirmed what Kaelen had suspected. The curse was fueled by the king's own repression, she said. By breaking the seal on your own magic and offering it freely in love, you didn't just save him. You broke the cycle. The ice is gone. Kaelen didn't stop there. She rode to her father's estate, flanked by Silas's most elite guards. How she found Lord Alaric in his study, drinking wine and plotting. The bind is broken, father, she said, her voice like thunder. And the king knows the truth about Eric. He knows about the fire you set. Alaric tried to laugh, but the sight of Kaelen's glowing eyes silenced him. You're a monster, he whispered. No, Kaelen said. I am a queen, and you are a prisoner. Alaric was stripped of his lands and titles, sent to the very salt mines he had threatened to send Kaelen to. Seraphina was exiled to a distant pack, where her beauty and spite would have no power. 6 months later, the Artorian Great Hall was no longer a place of stagnant desperation. It was a place of light and laughter. The heavy curtains had been pulled back, letting in the spring sun. Kaelen stood on the dais, her head held high, the cross-shaped scar on her forehead shining like a badge of honor. She wore no hood, no veil. She wore a crown of gold and rubies. Beside her stood Silas, his arm around her waist, his touch no longer cold, but radiating a steady alpha warmth. In her arms she held a small bundle, Milo, the prince of Artoria. He had his father's gold hair and his mother's firelit eyes. He squalled for attention, a healthy, powerful sound. The ban on magic had been lifted. The mating auctions had been abolished, replaced by a royal fund to support unmated wolves and integrate them into packs with dignity. A new academy for magic was being built on the outskirts of the city. Kaelen looked out at the crowd. She saw wolves and witches standing together, the old fears beginning to fade. Silas leaned down, whispering in her ear, "He's hungry again. He has your appetite." Kaelen smiled, kissing her son's brow. "He's a wolf and a witch, Silas. He'll always be hungry for more. More life, more magic, more love." The king laughed, a sound that finally, truly, melted the last of the winter in Artoria. They had both entered their marriage seeking an escape from their ghosts. Instead, they had found a fire that would burn for generations. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this tale of fire and ice, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more faceless storytelling. Comment below, what do you think Milo's first magical power will be? I read every single comment. Remember to click the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, stay legendary.